Everyone loves to listen to a good book, and there are so many wonderful ones to choose, so we decided to bring you this podcast of Stories Come to Life. Each episode features a story from either classic or modern literature, especially chosen to be interesting and exciting to hear. So sit back, relax, and listen to this story come to life. Welcome to Stories Come to Life. I am your host, Kathryn Lopez Luker. Lucy Maud Montgomery, who wrote Anne of Green Gables, also wrote a delightful book about Sara Stanley, better known as the Story Girl, told from the perspective of Beverley, one of two brothers who have come to stay on a farm with their aunts and uncles and cousins while their father is away. This book takes place on Prince Edward Island in Canada. In this first episode, we meet Felix and Beverley and get to know some of the rest of the characters. Felix and Beverley's father was raised in this old homestead, and all their lives the boys have heard stories of the orchard, where they each have a special tree, the deep well with its little blue cup to drink from, and other tales that have become part of their heritage. Even though the boys have heard of these places all their lives, the reality is even better than their imaginations. Best of all are their cousins, including the Story Girl, who promise wonderful adventures and friendships. Now sit back, relax, and listen to this story come to life. The Story Girl by L.M. Montgomery. Chapter 1. The Home of Our Fathers. I do like a road, because you can always be wondering what is at the end of it. The Story Girl said that once upon a time. Felix and I, on the May morning, when we left Toronto for Prince Edward Island, had not then heard her say it, and indeed, we were but barely aware of the existence of such a person as the Story Girl. We did not know her at all under that name. We knew only that a cousin, Sara Stanley, whose mother, our Aunt Felicity, was dead, was living down on the island with Uncle Roger and Aunt Olivia King, on a farm adjoining the old King homestead in Carlisle. We supposed we should get acquainted with her when we reached there, and we had an idea from Aunt Olivia's letters to Father that she would be quite a jolly creature. Further than that, we did not think about her. We were more interested in Felicity and Cecily and Dan, who lived on the homestead, and would therefore be our roofmates for a season. But the spirit of the Story Girl's yet unuttered remark was thrilling in our hearts that morning, as the train pulled out of Toronto. We were faring forth on a long road, and though we had some idea what would be at the end of it, there was enough glamour of the unknown about it to lend a wonderful charm to our speculations concerning it. We were delighted at the thought of seeing Father's old home, and living among the haunts of his boyhood. He had talked so much to us about it, and described its scenes so often and so minutely, that he had inspired us with some of his own deep-seated affection for it, an affection that had never waned in all his years of exile. We had a vague feeling that we somehow belonged there, in that cradle of our family, though we had never seen it. We had always looked forward eagerly to the promised day when Father would take us down home to the old house, with the spruces behind it and the famous King orchard before it, when we might ramble in Uncle Stephen's walk, drink from the deep well with the Chinese roof over it, stand on the pulpit stone, and eat apples from our birthday trees. The time had come sooner than we had dared to hope, but Father could not take us after all. His firm asked him to go to Rio de Janeiro that spring to take charge of their new branch there. It was too good a chance to lose, for Father was a poor man, and it meant promotion and increase of salary. But it also meant the temporary breaking up of our home. Our mother had died before either of us was old enough to remember her. Father could not take us to Rio de Janeiro, and in the end he decided to send us to Uncle Alec and Aunt Janet down on the homestead, and our housekeeper, who belonged to the island and was now returning to it, took charge of us on the journey. I fear she had an anxious trip of it, poor woman. She was constantly in quite justifiable terror lest we should be lost or killed. She must have felt great relief when she reached Charlottetown and handed us over to the keeping of Uncle Alec. Indeed, she said as much. "The fat one isn't so bad. He isn't so quick to move and get out of your sight while you're winking as the thin one. But the only safe way to travel with those young'uns would be to have 'em both tied to you with a very short rope. A mighty short rope." The fat one was Felix, who was very sensitive about his plumpness. He was always taking exercises to make him thin, with the dismal result that he became fatter all the time. He vowed that he didn't care, but he did care terribly, and he glowered at Mrs. McLaren in a most undutiful fashion. He had never liked her since the day she had told him he would soon be as broad as he was long. For my own part, I was rather sorry to see her going, and she cried over us and wished us well, but we had forgotten all about her by the time we reached the open country, driving along, one on either side of Uncle Alec, whom we loved from the moment we saw him. He was a small man, with thin, delicate features, close-clipped grey beard, and large, tired blue eyes. Father's eyes over again. We knew that Uncle Alec was fond of children, and was heart-glad to welcome Alan's boys. We felt at home with him and were not afraid to ask him questions on any subject that came uppermost in our minds. We became very good friends with him on that 24-mile drive. Much to our disappointment, it was dark when we reached Carlisle. Too dark to see anything very distinctly as we drove up the lane of the old King homestead on the hill. Behind us a young moon was hanging over southwestern meadows of springtime peace, but all about us were the soft, moist shadows of a May night. We peered eagerly through the gloom. "There's the big willow, Bev," whispered Felix excitedly as we turned in at the gate. There it was, in truth, the tree Grandfather King had planted when he returned one evening from ploughing in the brook field and stuck the willow switch he had used all day in the soft soil by the gate. It had taken root and grown. Our fathers and our uncles and aunts had played in its shadow, and now it was a massive thing with a huge girth of trunk and great spreading boughs, each of them as large as a tree in itself. "I'm going to climb it tomorrow," I said joyfully. Off to the right was a dim branching place, which we knew was the orchard, and on our left, among sibilant spruces and firs, was the old whitewashed house, from which presently a light gleamed through an open door, and Aunt Janet, a big, bustling, sunsy woman with full-blown peony cheeks, came to welcome us. Soon after we were at supper in the kitchen, with its low, dark raftered ceiling, from which substantial hams and flitches of bacon were hanging. Everything was just as Father had described it. We felt that we had come home, leaving exile behind us. Felicity, Cecily, and Dan were sitting opposite us, staring at us when they thought we would be too busy eating to see them. We tried to stare at them when they were eating, and as a result we were always catching each other at it and feeling cheap and embarrassed. Dan was the oldest. He was my age, 13. He was a lean, freckled fellow with rather long, lank brown hair and a shapely king nose. We recognized it at once. His mouth was his own, however, for it was like to no mouth on either the king or the ward side, and nobody would have been anxious to claim it, for it was an undeniably ugly one, long and narrow and twisted, but it could grin in friendly fashion, and both Felix and I felt that we were going to like Dan. Felicity was 12. She had been called after Aunt Felicity, who was the twin sister of Uncle Felix. Aunt Felicity, and Uncle Felix, as Father had often told us, had died on the same day, far apart, and were buried side by side in the old Carlisle graveyard. We had known from Aunt Olivia's letters that Felicity was the beauty of the connection, and we had been curious to see her on that account. She fully justified our expectations. She was plump and dimpled, with big, dark blue, heavy-lidded eyes, soft, feathery golden curls, and a pink and white skin, the king complexion. The kings were noted for their noses and complexion. Felicity also had delightful hands and wrists. At every turn of them a dimple showed itself. It was a pleasure to wonder what her elbows must be like. She was very nicely dressed in a pink print and a frilled muslin apron, and we understood from something Dan said that she had dressed up in honor of our coming. This made us feel quite important. So far as we knew, no feminine creatures had ever gone to the pains of dressing up on our account before. Cecily, who was 11, was pretty also, or would have been had Felicity not been there. Felicity rather took the color from other girls. Cecily looked pale and thin beside her, but she had dainty little features, smooth brown hair of satin sheen, and mild brown eyes, with just a hint of demureness in them now and again. We remembered that Aunt Olivia had written to Father that Cecily was a true ward. She had no sense of humor. We did not know what this meant, but we thought it was not exactly complimentary. Still, we were both inclined to think that we would like Cecily better than Felicity. To be sure, Felicity was a stunning beauty, but with the swift and unerring intuition of childhood, which feels in a moment what it sometimes takes maturity much time to perceive, we realized that she was rather too well aware of her good looks. In brief, we saw that Felicity was vain.
"It's a wonder the Story Girl isn't over to see you," said Uncle Alec. "She's been quite wild with excitement about your coming."
"She hasn't been very well all day," explained Cecily, "and Aunt Olivia wouldn't let her come out in the night air. She made her go to bed instead. The Story Girl was awfully disappointed."
"Who's the Story Girl?" asked Felix.
"Oh, Sara Stanley. We call her the Story Girl, partly because she's such a hand to tell stories. Oh, I can't begin to describe it. And partly because Sarah Ray, who lives at the foot of the hill, often comes up to play with us, and it's awkward to have two girls of the same name in the same crowd. Besides, Sara Stanley doesn't like her name, and she'd rather be called the Story Girl." Dan, speaking for the first time, rather sheepishly volunteered the information that Peter had also been intending to come over, but had to go home to take some flour to his mother instead.
"Peter?" I questioned. I'd never heard of any Peter. "He's your Uncle Roger's handy boy," said Uncle Alec. "His name is Peter Craig, and he's a real smart little chap. But he's got his share of mischief, that same lad."
"He wants to be Felicity's beau," said Dan slyly.
"Don't talk silly nonsense, Dan," said Aunt Janet severely.
Felicity tossed her golden head and shot an unsisterly glance at Dan. "I wouldn't be very likely to have a hired boy for a beau," she observed. We saw that her anger was real, not affected. Evidently, Peter was not an admirer of whom Felicity was proud. We were very hungry boys, and when we had eaten all we could, and oh, what suppers Aunt Janet always spread, we discovered that we were very tired also, too tired to go out and explore our ancestral domains, as we would have liked to do, despite the dark. We were quite willing to go to bed, and presently we found ourselves tucked away upstairs in the very room, looking out eastward into the spruce grove, which Father had once occupied. Dan shared it with us, sleeping in a bed of his own in the opposite corner. The sheets and pillow slips were fragrant with lavender, and one of Grandmother King's noted patchwork quilts was over us. The window was open, and we heard the frogs singing down in the swamp of the brook meadow. We had heard frogs sing in Ontario, of course, but certainly Prince Edward Island frogs were more tuneful and mellow. Or was it simply the glamour of old family traditions and tales, which was over us, lending its magic to all sights and sounds around us? This was home, Father's home, our home. We had never lived long enough in any one house to develop a feeling of affection for it. But here, under the roof tree built by great-grandfather King 90 years ago, that feeling swept into our boyish hearts and souls like a flood of living sweetness and tenderness. Just think, those are the very frogs Father listened to when he was a little boy, whispered Felix. They can hardly be the same frogs, I objected doubtfully, not feeling very certain about the possible longevity of frogs. It's 20 years since Father left home. Well, they're the descendants of the frogs he heard, said Felix, and they're singing in the same swamp. That's near enough. Our door was open, and in their room across the narrow hall, the girls were preparing for bed, and talking rather more loudly than they might have done had they realized how far their sweet, shrill voices carried. "What do you think of the boys?" asked Cecily. "Beverley is handsome, but Felix is too fat," answered Felicity promptly. Felix twitched the quilt rather viciously and grunted. But I began to think I would like Felicity. It might not be altogether her fault that she was vain. How could she help it when she looked in the mirror? "I think they're both nice and nice-looking," said Cecily. "Dear little soul. I wonder what the Story Girl will think of them," said Felicity, as if after all that was the main thing. Somehow we too felt that it was. We felt that if the Story Girl did not approve of us, it made little difference who else did or did not. "I wonder if the Story Girl is pretty," said Felix aloud. "No, she isn't," said Dan instantly from across the room. "But you'll think she is while she's talking to you. Everybody does. It's only when you go away from her that you find out she isn't a bit pretty after all." The girls' door shut with a bang. Silence fell over the house. We drifted into the land of sleep, wondering if the Story Girl would like us. Chapter 2. A Queen of Hearts. I wakened shortly after sunrise. The pale May sunshine was showering through the spruces, and a chill, inspiring wind was tossing the boughs about. "Felix, wake up," I whispered, shaking him. "What's the matter?" he murmured reluctantly. "It's morning. Let's get up and go down and out. I can't wait another minute to see the places Father's told us of." We slipped out of bed and dressed, without arousing Dan, who was still slumbering soundly, his mouth wide open, and his bedclothes kicked off on the floor. I had hard work to keep Felix from trying to see if he could shy a marble into that tempting open mouth. I told him it would waken Dan, who would then likely insist on getting up and accompanying us, and it would be so much nicer to go by ourselves for the first time. Everything was very still as we crept downstairs. Out in the kitchen, we heard someone, presumably Uncle Alec, lighting the fire, but the heart of the house had not yet begun to beat for the day. We paused a moment in the hall to look at the big grandfather clock. It was not going, but it seemed like an old familiar acquaintance to us, with the gilt balls on its 3 peaks, the little dial and pointer which would indicate the changes of the moon, and the very dent in its wooden door, which Father had made when he was a boy, by kicking it in a fit of naughtiness. Then we opened the front door and stepped out, rapture swelling in our bosoms. There was a rare breeze from the south blowing to meet us. The shadows of the spruces were long and clear-cut. The exquisite skies of early morning, blue and wind-winnowed, were over us. Away to the west, beyond the brook-field, was a long valley and a hill purple with firs and laced with still leafless beeches and maples. Beyond the house was a grove of fir and spruce, a dim, cool place where the winds were fond of purring and where there was always a resinous, woodsy odor. On the further side of it was a thick plantation of slender silver birches and whispering poplars, and beyond it was Uncle Roger's house. Right before us, girt about with its trim spruce hedge, was the famous King Orchard, the history of which was woven into our earliest recollections. We knew all about it from Father's descriptions, and in fancy we had roamed it many a time and oft. It was now 60 years since it had had its beginning, when Grandfather King brought his bride home. Before the wedding, he had fenced off the big south meadow that sloped to the sun. It was the finest, most fertile field on the farm, and the neighbors told young Abraham King that he would raise many a fine crop of wheat in that meadow. Abraham King smiled, and being a man of few words, said nothing, but in his mind he had a vision of the years to be, and in that vision he saw not rippling acres of harvest gold, but great leafy avenues of wide-spreading trees laden with fruit to gladden the eyes of children and grandchildren yet unborn. It was a vision to develop slowly into fulfillment. Grandfather King was in no hurry. He did not set his whole orchard out at once, for he wished it to grow with his life and history, and be bound up with all of good and joy that should come to his household. So the morning after he had brought his young wife home, they went together to the south meadow, and planted their bridal trees. These trees were no longer living, but they had been when Father was a boy, and every spring bedecked themselves in blossom as delicately tinted as Elizabeth King's face, when she walked through the old south meadow in the morn of her life and love. When a son was born to Abraham and Elizabeth, a tree was planted in the orchard for him. They had 14 children in all, and each child had its birth tree. Every family festival was commemorated in like fashion, and every beloved visitor who spent a night under their roof was expected to plant a tree in the orchard. So it came to pass that every tree in it was a fair green monument to some love or delight of the vanished years. And each grandchild had its tree there also, set out by grandfather, when the tidings of its birth reached him. Not always an apple tree. Perhaps it was a plum or cherry or pear, but it was always known by the name of the person for whom or by whom it was planted. And Felix and I knew as much about Aunt Felicity's pears and Aunt Julia's cherries and Uncle Alex's apples and the Reverend Mr. Scott's plums as if we had been born and bred among them. And now we come to the orchard. It was before us, and we had only to open that little whitewashed gate in the hedge, and we might find ourselves in its storied domain. But before we reached the gate, we glanced to our left, along the grassy, spruce-bordered lane, which led over to Uncle Roger's, and at the entrance of that lane we saw a girl standing, with a gray cat at her feet. She lifted her hand and beckoned blithely to us, and, the orchard forgotten, we followed her summons, for we knew that this must be the Story Girl, and in that glorious and graceful gesture was an allurement not to be gainsaid or denied. We looked at her as we drew near with such interest that we forgot to feel shy. No, she was not pretty. She was tall for her 14 years, slim and straight. Around her long white face, rather too long and too white, fell sleek dark brown curls, tied above either ear with rosettes of scarlet ribbon. Her large curving mouth was as red as a poppy, and she had brilliant almond-shaped hazel eyes, but we did not think her pretty. Then she spoke. She said, "Good morning." Never had we heard a voice like hers. Never in all my life since have I heard such a voice. I cannot describe it. I might say it was clear. I might say it was sweet. I might say it was vibrant and far-reaching and bell-like. All this would be true, but it would give you no real idea of the peculiar quality which made the Story Girl's voice what it was. If voices had color, hers would have been like a rainbow. It made words live. Whatever she said became a breathing entity, not a mere verbal statement or utterance. Felix and I were too young to understand or analyze the impression it made upon us, but we instantly felt at her greeting that it was a good morning, a surpassingly good morning, the very best morning that had ever happened in this most excellent of worlds. "You are Felix and Beverley," she went on, shaking our hands with an air of frank comradeship, which was very different from the shy, feminine advances of Felicity and Cecily. From that moment, we were as good friends as if we had known each other for 100 years. "I'm glad to see you. I was so disappointed I couldn't go over last night. I got up early this morning, though, for I felt sure you would be up early, too, and that you'd like to have me tell you about things. I can tell things so much better than Felicity or Cecily. Do you think Felicity is very pretty?" "She's the prettiest girl I ever saw," I said enthusiastically, remembering that Felicity had called me handsome. "All the boys think so," said the Story Girl, though not, I fancied, quite well pleased. "And I suppose she is. She is a splendid cook, too, though she's only 12. I can't cook. I'm trying to learn, but I don't make much progress. And Olivia says I haven't enough natural gumption ever to be a cook. But I'd love to be able to make as good cakes and pies as Felicity can make. But then, Felicity is stupid. It's not ill-natured of me to say that, it's just the truth, and you'll soon find it out for yourselves. I like Felicity very well, but she is stupid. Cecily is ever so much cleverer. Cecily's a dear, so is Uncle Alec, and Aunt Janet is pretty nice, too." "What's Aunt Olivia like?" asked Felix. "Aunt Olivia is very pretty. She's just like a pansy, all velvety and purpley and goldy." Felix and I saw, somewhere inside of our heads, a velvet and purple and gold pansy woman, just as the Story Girl spoke. "But is she nice?" I asked. That was the main question about grown-ups. Their looks mattered little to us. "She's lovely, but she's 29, you know. That's pretty old. She doesn't bother me much. Aunt Janet says that I'd have no bringing up at all if it wasn't for her. And Olivia says children should just be let come up, that everything else is settled for them long before they're born. I don't understand that, do you?" No, we did not. But it was our experience that grown-ups had a habit of saying things hard to understand. "What's Uncle Roger like?" was our next question. "Well, I like Uncle Roger," said the Story Girl meditatively. "He's big and jolly, but he teases people too much. You ask him a serious question, and you get a ridiculous answer. He hardly ever scolds or gets cross, though, and that is something. He's an old bachelor." "Doesn't he ever mean to get married?" asked Felix. "I don't know. And Olivia wishes he would, because she's tired keeping house for him, and she wants to go to Aunt Julia in California. But she says he'll never get married because he's looking for perfection, and when he finds her, she won't have him." By this time we were all sitting down on the gnarled roots of the spruces, and the big gray cat came over and made friends with us. He was a lordly animal, with a silver-gray coat beautifully marked with darker stripes. With such coloring, most cats would have had white or silver feet, but he had 4 black paws and a black nose. Such points gave him an air of distinction, and marked him out as quite different from the common or garden variety of cats. He seemed to be a cat with a tolerably good opinion of himself, and his response to our advances was slightly tinged with condescension. "This isn't Topsy, is it?" I asked. I knew at once that the question was a foolish one. Topsy, the cat of which Father had talked, had flourished 30 years before, and all her 9 lives could scarcely have lasted so long. No, but it is Topsy's great-great-great-great-grandson, said the Story Girl gravely. His name is Paddy, and he's my own particular cat. We have barn cats, but Paddy never associates with them. I'm very good friends with all cats. They're so sleek and comfortable and dignified, and it's so easy to make them happy. Oh, I'm so glad you boys have come to live here. Nothing ever happens here except days. So we have to make our own good times. We were short of boys before, only Dan and Peter to 4 girls. 4 girls? Oh yes, Sarah Ray. Felicity mentioned her. What's she like? Where does she live? Just down the hill. You can't see the house for the spruce bush. Sarah is a nice girl. She's only 11, and her mother is dreadfully strict. She never allows Sarah to read a single story. Just you fancy! Sarah's conscience is always troubling her for doing things she's sure her mother wouldn't approve, but it never prevents her from doing them. It only spoils her fun. Uncle Roger said that a mother who won't let you do anything, and a conscience that won't let you enjoy anything, is an awful combination. And he doesn't wonder Sarah is pale and thin and nervous. But between you and me, I believe the real reason is that her mother doesn't give her half enough to eat. Not that she's mean, you know, but she thinks it isn't healthy for children to eat much, or anything but certain things. Isn't it fortunate we weren't born into that sort of family? I think it's awfully lucky we were all born into the same family, Felix remarked. Isn't it? I've often thought so. And I've often thought what a dreadful thing it would have been if Grandfather and Grandmother King had never got married to each other. I don't suppose there would have been a single one of us children here at all. Or if we were, we would be part somebody else, and that would be almost as bad. When I think it all over, I can't feel too thankful that Grandfather and Grandmother King happened to marry each other, when there were so many other people they might have married. Felix and I shivered. We felt suddenly that we had escaped a dreadful danger, the danger of having been born somebody else. But it took the Story Girl to make us realize just how dreadful it was, and what a terrible risk we had run years before we, or our parents either, had existed. Who lives over there? I asked, pointing to a house across the fields. Oh, that belongs to the Awkward Man. His name is Jasper Dale, but everyone calls him the Awkward Man. And they do say he writes poetry. He calls his place Golden Milestone. I know why, because I've read Longfellow's poems. He never goes into society because he's so awkward. The girls laugh at him, and he doesn't like it. I know a story about him, and I'll tell it to you sometime. And who lives in that other house? Asked Felix, looking over the westering valley, where a little gray roof was visible among the trees. Old Peg Bowen. She's very odd. She lives there with a lot of pet animals in winter, and in summer she roams over the country and begs her meals. They say she's crazy. People have always tried to frighten us children into good behavior by telling us that Peg Bowen would catch us if we didn't behave. I'm not so frightened of her as I once was, but I don't think I'd like to be caught by her. Sarah Ray is dreadfully scared of her. Peter Craig says she's a witch, and that he bets she's at the bottom of it when the butter won't come. But I don't believe that. Witches are so scarce nowadays. There may be some somewhere in the world, but it's not likely there are any here right in Prince Edward Island. They used to be very plentiful long ago. I know some splendid witch stories I'll tell you someday. They'll just make your blood freeze in your veins. We hadn't a doubt of it. If anybody could freeze the blood in our veins, this girl with the wonderful voice could. But it was a May morning, and our young blood was running blithely in our veins. We suggested that a visit to the orchard would be more agreeable. All right, I know stories about it, too, she said as we walked across the yard, followed by Patty of the waving tail. Oh, aren't you glad it's spring? The beauty of winter is that it makes you appreciate spring. The latch of the gate clicked under the Story Girl's hand, and the next moment we were in the King orchard. Chapter 3. Legends of the Old Orchard. Outside of the orchard, the grass was only beginning to grow green, but here, sheltered by the spruce hedges from uncertain winds and sloping to southern suns, it was already like a wonderful velvet carpet. The leaves on the trees were beginning to come out in woolly grayish clusters, and there were purple-penciled white violets at the base of the pulpit stone. "It's all just as Father described it," said Felix with a blissful sigh. "And there's the well with the Chinese roof." We hurried over to it, treading on the spears of mint that were beginning to shoot up about it. It was a very deep well, and the curb was of rough, undressed stones. Over it, the queer pagoda-like roof, built by Uncle Stephen on his return from a voyage to China, was covered with yet leafless vines. "It's so pretty when the vines leaf out and hang down in long festoons," said the Story Girl. "The birds build their nests in it. A pair of wild canaries come here every summer, and ferns grow out between the stones of the well as far down as you can see. The water is lovely. Uncle Edward preached his finest sermon about the Bethlehem well, where David's soldiers went to get him water, and he illustrated it by describing his old well at the homestead, this very well, and how in foreign lands he had longed for its sparkling water. So you see, it is quite famous." "There's a cup just like the one that used to be here in Father's time," exclaimed Felix, pointing to an old-fashioned shallow cup of clouded blueware on a little shelf inside the curb. "It's the very same cup," said the Story Girl impressively. "Isn't it an amazing thing? That cup has been here for 40 years, and hundreds of people have drunk from it, and it has never been broken. Aunt Julia dropped it down the well once, but they fished it up, not hurt a bit except for that little nick in the rim. I think it's bound up with the fortunes of the King family, like the luck of Eden Hall in Longfellow's poem. It's the last cup of Grandmother King's second-best set. Her best set is still complete. And Olivia has it. You must get her to show it to you. It's so pretty with red berries all over it, and the funniest little pot-bellied cream jug. Aunt Olivia never uses it except on a family anniversary." We took a drink from the blue cup, and then went to find our birthday trees. We were rather disappointed to find them quite large, sturdy ones. It seemed to us that they should still be in the sapling stage, corresponding to our boyhood. "Your apples are lovely to eat," the Story Girl said to me, "but Felix's are only good for pies. Those two big trees behind them are the twins' trees, my mother and Uncle Felix, you know. The apples are so dead sweet that nobody but us children and the French boys can eat them. And that tall, slender tree over there, with the branches all growing straight up, is a seedling that came up of itself, and nobody can eat its apples. They're so sour and bitter. Even the pigs won't eat them. Aunt Janet tried to make pies of them once, because she said she hated to see them going to waste. But she never tried again. She said it was better to waste apples alone than apples and sugar too. And then she tried giving them away to the French hired men, but they wouldn't even carry them home." The Story Girl's words fell on the morning air like pearls and diamonds. Even her prepositions and conjunctions had untold charm, hinting at mystery and laughter and magic bound up in everything she mentioned. Apple pies and sour seedlings and pigs became straightway invested with a glamour of romance. "I like to hear you talk," said Felix, in his grave, stodgy way. "Everybody does," said the Story Girl coolly. "I'm glad you like the way I talk, but I want you to like me, too, as well as you like Felicity and Cecily. Not better. I wanted that once, but I've got over it. I found out in Sunday school the day the minister taught our class that it was selfish, but I want you to like me as well."
"Well, I will, for one," said Felix emphatically. I think he was remembering that Felicity had called him fat.
Cecily now joined us. It appeared that it was Felicity's morning to help prepare breakfast. Therefore she could not come. We all went down to Uncle Stephen's walk. This was a double row of apple trees, running down the western side of the orchard. Uncle Stephen was the firstborn of Abraham and Elizabeth King. He had none of grandfather's abiding love for woods and meadows and the kindly ways of the warm red earth. Grandmother King had been a ward, and in Uncle Stephen the blood of the seafaring race claimed its own. To sea he must go, despite the pleadings and tears of a reluctant mother, and it was from the sea he came to set out his avenue in the orchard with trees brought from a foreign land. Then he sailed away again, and the ship was never heard of more. The first gray came in grandmother's brown hair in those months of waiting. Then, for the first time, the orchard heard the sound of weeping, and was consecrated by a sorrow. "When the blossoms come out, it's wonderful to walk here," said the Story Girl. "It's like a dream of fairyland, as if you were walking in a king's palace. The apples are delicious, and in winter it's a splendid place for coasting." From the walk we went to the pulpit stone, a huge gray boulder as high as a man's head, in the southeastern corner. It was straight and smooth in front, but it sloped down in natural steps behind, with a ledge midway on which one could stand. It had played an important part in the games of our uncles and aunts, being fortified castle, Indian ambush, throne, pulpit, or concert platform, as occasion required. Uncle Edward had preached his first sermon at the age of 8 from that old gray boulder, and Aunt Julia, whose voice was to delight thousands, sang her earliest madrigals there. The Story Girl mounted to the ledge, sat on the rim, and looked at us. Pat sat gravely at its base, and daintily washed his face with his black paws. "Now for your stories about the orchard," said I. "There are 2 important ones," said the Story Girl. "The story of the poet who was kissed, and the tale of the family ghost. Which one shall I tell?" "Tell them both," said Felix greedily, "but tell the ghost one first." "I don't know." The Story Girl looked dubious. "That sort of story ought to be told in the twilight among the shadows. Then it would frighten the souls out of your bodies." We thought it might be more agreeable not to have the souls frightened out of our bodies, and we voted for the family ghost. "Ghost stories are more comfortable in the daytime," said Felix. The Story Girl began it, and we listened avidly. Cecily, who had heard it many times before, listened just as eagerly as we did. She declared to me afterwards that no matter how often the Story Girl told a story, it always seemed as new and exciting as if you had just heard it for the first time. "Long, long ago," began the Story Girl, her voice giving us an impression of remote antiquity, "even before Grandfather King was born, an orphan cousin of his lived here with his parents. Her name was Emily King. She was very small and very sweet. She had soft brown eyes that were too timid to look straight at anybody, like Cecily's there, and long, sleek brown curls like mine, and she had a tiny birthmark, like a pink butterfly on one cheek, right here. Of course there was no orchard here then. It was just a field, but there was a clump of white birches in it, right where that big spreading tree of Uncle Alex's is now, and Emily liked to sit among the ferns under the birches and read or sew. She had a lover. His name was Malcolm Ward, and he was as handsome as a prince. She loved him with all her heart, and he loved her the same, but they had never spoken about it. They used to meet under the birches and talk about everything except love. One day he told her he was coming the next day to ask a very important question, and he wanted to find her under the birches when he came. Emily promised to meet him there. I'm sure she stayed awake that night, thinking about it and wondering what the important question would be, although she knew perfectly well I would have. And the next day she dressed herself beautifully in her best pale blue muslin, and sleeked her curls, and went smiling to the birches. And while she was waiting there, thinking such lovely thoughts, a neighbor's boy came running up, a boy who didn't know about her romance, and cried out that Malcolm Ward had been killed by his gun going off accidentally. Emily just put her hands to her heart, so, and fell, all white and broken, among the ferns, and when she came back to life, she never cried or lamented. She was changed. She was never like herself again, and she was never contented unless she was dressed in her blue muslin and waiting under the birches. She got paler and paler every day, but the pink butterfly grew redder until it looked just like a stain of blood upon her white cheek. When the winter came, she died. But next spring, the Story Girl dropped her voice to a whisper that was as audible and thrilling as her louder tones. People began to tell that Emily was sometimes seen waiting under the birches still. Nobody knew who told it first, but more than one person saw her. Grandfather saw her when he was a little boy, and my mother saw her once.
"Did you ever see her?" asked Felix skeptically.
"No, but I shall some day, if I keep on believing in her," said the Story Girl confidently.
"I wouldn't like to see her. I'd be afraid," said Cecily with a shiver.
"There wouldn't be anything to be afraid of," said the Story Girl reassuringly. "It's not as if it were a strange ghost. It's our own family ghost, so of course it wouldn't hurt us."
We were not so sure of this. Ghosts were unchancy folk, even if they were our family ghosts.
The Story Girl had made the tale very real to us. We were glad we had not heard it in the evening. How could we ever have got back to the house through the shadows and swaying branches of a darkening orchard? As it was, we were almost afraid to look up it, lest we should see the waiting, blue-clad Emily under Uncle Alex's tree. But all we saw was Felicity, tearing over the green sward, her curls streaming behind her in a golden cloud. "Felicity's afraid she's missed something," remarked the Story Girl in a tone of quiet amusement. "Is your breakfast ready, Felicity, or have I time to tell the boys the story of the poet who was kissed?" "Breakfast is ready, but we can't have it till Father's through attending to the sick cow, so you will likely have time," answered Felicity. Felix and I couldn't keep our eyes off her. Crimson-cheeked, shining-eyed from her haste, her face was like a rose of youth. But when the Story Girl spoke, we forgot to look at Felicity. About 10 years after Grandfather and Grandmother King were married, a young man came to visit them. He was a distant relative of Grandmother's, and he was a poet. He was just beginning to be famous. He was very famous afterward. He came into the orchard to write a poem, and he fell asleep with his head on a bench that used to be under Grandfather's tree. Then Great Aunt Edith came into the orchard. She was not a great aunt then, of course. She was only 18, with red lips and black hair and eyes. They say she was always full of mischief. She had been away, and had just come home, and she didn't know about the poet, but when she saw him sleeping there, she thought he was a cousin they had been expecting from Scotland, and she tiptoed up, just so, and bent over, just so, and kissed his cheek. Then he opened his big blue eyes and looked up into Edith's face. She blushed as red as a rose, for she knew she had done a dreadful thing. This could not be her cousin from Scotland, she knew, for he had written so to her that he had eyes as black as her own. Edith ran away and hid, and of course she felt still worse when she found out that he was a famous poet, but he wrote one of his most beautiful poems on it afterwards and sent it to her, and it was published in one of his books. We had seen it all, the sleeping genius, the roguish red-lipped girl, the kiss, dropped as lightly as a rose petal on the sunburned cheek.
"They should have got married," said Felix.
"Well, in a book they would have. But you see, this was real life," said the Story Girl. "We sometimes act the story out. I like it when Peter plays the poet. I don't like it when Dan is the poet because he's so freckled and screws his eyes up so tight. But you can hardly ever coax Peter to be the poet, except when Felicity is Edith, and Dan is so obliging that way." "What is Peter like?" I asked. "Peter is splendid. His mother lives on the Markdale Road and washes for a living. Peter's father ran away and left them when Peter was only 3 years old. He has never come back, and they don't know whether he's alive or dead. Isn't that a nice way to behave to your family? Peter has worked for his board ever since he was 6. Uncle Roger sends him to school and pays him wages in the summer. We all like Peter, except Felicity." "I like Peter well enough in his place," said Felicity primly. "But you make far too much of him, Mother says. He's only a hired boy, and he hasn't been well brought up, and hasn't much education. I don't think you should make such an equal of him as you do." Laughter rippled over the Story Girl's face, as shadow waves go over ripe wheat before a wind. "Peter is a real gentleman, and he's more interesting than you could ever be, if you were brought up and educated for 100 years, she said. "He can hardly write," said Felicity. "William the Conqueror couldn't write at all," said the Story Girl crushingly. "He never goes to church and he never says his prayers," retorted Felicity, uncrushed.
"I do too,"
said Peter himself, suddenly appearing through a little gap in the hedge.
"I say my prayers sometimes."
This Peter was a slim, shapely fellow, with laughing black eyes and thick black curls. Early in the season as it was, he was barefooted. His attire consisted of a faded gingham shirt and a scanty pair of corduroy knickerbockers, but he wore it with such an unconscious air of purple and fine linen that he seemed to be much better dressed than he really was. "You don't pray very often," insisted Felicity.
"Well, God'll be all the more likely to listen to me if I don't pester him all the time," argued Peter.
This was rank heresy to Felicity, but the Story Girl looked as if she thought there might be something in it. "You never go to church anyhow," continued Felicity, determined not to be argued down.
"Well, I ain't going to church till I've made up my mind whether I'm going to be a Methodist or a Presbyterian. Aunt Jane was a Methodist. My mother ain't much of anything, but I mean to be something. It's more respectable to be a Methodist or a Presbyterian or something than not to be anything. When I've settled what I'm to be, I'm going to church same as you."
"That's not the same as being born something," said Felicity loftily.
"I think it's a good deal better to pick your own religion than have to take it just because it was what your folks had," retorted Peter.
"Now, never mind quarreling," said Cecily. "You leave Peter alone, Felicity. Peter, this is Beverley King and this is Felix, and we're all going to be good friends and have a lovely summer together. Think of the games we can have. But if you go squabbling, you'll spoil it all. Peter, what are you going to do today?"
"Harrow the woodfield and dig your Aunt Olivia's flower beds."
"Aunt Olivia and I planted sweet peas yesterday," said the Story Girl, "and I planted a little bed of my own. I'm not going to dig them up this year to see if they've sprouted. It's bad for them. I shall try to cultivate patience, no matter how long they are coming up." I'm going to help Mother plant the vegetable garden today, said Felicity. Oh, I never like the vegetable garden, said the Story Girl, except when I'm hungry. Then I do like to go and look at the nice little rows of onions and beets. But I love a flower garden. I think I could be always good if I lived in a garden all the time. Adam and Eve lived in a garden all the time, said Felicity, and they were far from being always good. They mightn't have kept good as long as they did if they hadn't lived in a garden, said the Story Girl. We were now summoned to breakfast. Peter and the Story Girl slipped away through the gap, followed by Patty, and the rest of us walked up the orchard to the house. "Well, what do you think of the Story Girl?" asked Felicity. "She's just fine," said Felix enthusiastically. "I never heard anything like her to tell stories." "She can't cook," said Felicity, "and she hasn't a good complexion. Mind you, she says she's going to be an actress when she grows up. Isn't that dreadful?" We didn't exactly see why. "Oh, because actresses are always wicked people," said Felicity in a shocked tone. "But I dare say the Story Girl will go and be one just as soon as she can. Her father will back her up in it. He's an artist, you know." Evidently, Felicity thought artists and actresses and all such poor trash were members one of another. "And Olivia says the Story Girl is fascinating," said Cecily. "The very adjective." Felix and I recognized its beautiful fitness at once. Yes, the Story Girl was fascinating, and that was the final word to be said on the subject. Dan did not come down until breakfast was half over, and Aunt Janet talked to him after a fashion which made us realize that it would be well to keep, as the piquant country phrase went, from the rough side of her tongue. But all things considered, we liked the prospect of our summer very much. Felicity to look at, the Story Girl to tell us tales of wonder, Cecily to admire us, Dan and Peter to play with. What more could reasonable fellows want? Thank you for joining us for this episode of Stories Come to Life. Be sure to join us next time when we continue to listen to The Story Girl by L.M. Montgomery. I'd love to hear from you, so please email me at kluker@marshallpl.org. I'll talk to you again soon.